In this story, I'm sure that there were other people in this massive crowd who had equal or similarly insignificant offerings like this little boy. But the key thing is that they didn't bring the offering. The little boy knew, or he at least had faith, that that little offering that he could bring would bless people and would bless God. Nau te raudo, nāku te raudo, kara ai te iwi. With your basket and my basket, the people will thrive. Kamahito sahi ki te atua, ko ia te timatanga me te whakamutunga o ngā mea katoa. First of all, I want to thank God, who is the beginning and the end of all things. Ka mihi tōroa ki te koini Māori, koini ngā waihono i te pō me te wharekahui ariki rede hau, pai maride. I want to acknowledge the new Māori Queen. Ka mihi tō tōru ki te mana whenua ngā kaitiaki o tēnei wāhi taurekuta. I want to acknowledge the mana whenua of this land that allow all of us to be here. Ka mihi tō whā ki Alex korere atu. No tēnei ata I whakatuwhera nau hoki I whakatau mai te rangi Māori. I want to acknowledge Alex, who opened us in prayer this morning. She brought peace, and it was really just sweet, I think. Oh no, technology, really? Okay, that's all right. This morning, I want to do something that is potentially kind of familiar to a lot of us. Read a passage that is kind of familiar to a lot of us. But I am really hopeful and really feel that God is saying it to us, as He says, every Sunday that we meet together and just all the time. He's wanting to teach us just a little something that might make us go, I see. That we might have to kind of look at how we relate to God, how we worship Him, how we share our hearts with Him. God is so incredibly concerned with our worship, or He concerns Himself with it, should I say. Our worship really encompasses everything that we do, from the smallest actions that we take on maybe a Tuesday on the way to work, to the biggest actions, the grandest gestures that we might make on a Sunday, or when we go to a worship service, when we get to prepare, when we're caught up in the Spirit. It encompasses us giving of ourselves and us sharing our hearts with God. That which we know has immense value, and just when we pour out our heart to Him, but also that which we might overlook sometimes. God cares about all of it. And this passage that I'm going to read this morning, just building the suspense of what's the passage going to be. This passage is wrapped up in worship, and as we read it together, I'm going to hopefully point out a couple of the places where worship happens and how it happens. I want to kind of set a little scene, first of all, and that's with my family. So I live with my mum and dad, and we have the biggest dining table in my extended family. So that means that quite often we are the ones that have my grandparents, my aunties, my uncles, my sister come around for like family events, family meals, all of that sort of stuff, and it's a privilege. We have to make a couple of extra decisions, but these are the people that I love the most, that I cherish the most, that I would do anything for. And before we go off into worship, I'm gonna start how I mean to go on, and that is to say that every time we talk about worship in this passage, and every time we see worship in this passage, it's precious to God. It's so precious to God, and so we can be excited by that. Anyway, suspense over. We're going to read Jesus feeding the 5,000 from John chapter 6, verse 1-14. And it's going to be in the NLT. So there we go. I'm just going to bring this closer to me so I can read it. After this, Jesus crossed back over to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, also known as the Sea of Tiberias. A huge crowd kept following him wherever he went because they saw his miraculous signs as he healed the sick. Then Jesus climbed a hill and sat down with his disciples around him. It was nearly time for the Jewish Passover celebration. Jesus saw a huge crowd soon saw a huge crowd of people coming to look for him, and this is where he gets cheeky. Turning to Philip, he asked, "Where can we buy bread for all these people?" Cheeky, because he already knew. He was testing Philip, for he already knew what he was going to do. Philip replied, "Even if we worked for months, we wouldn't have enough money to feed them." Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. "There's a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Well, what good is it with this huge crowd?" "Tell everyone to sit down," Jesus said. So they all sat down on the grassy slopes. The men alone numbered about 5,000. Then Jesus took the loaves, gave thanks to God, and distributed them to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish, and they all ate as much as they wanted. After everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, "Now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by the people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. When the people saw him do this miraculous sign, they exclaimed, "Surely he is the prophet we have been expecting." When Jesus saw that they were ready to force him to be their king, he slipped away into the hills to be by himself. Pretty familiar to a lot of us, I think. In verse 3, we see right at the beginning that Jesus gets away. Yes, his disciples are with him, but he gets away to be with God. And we see how insistent Jesus is to meet with God and to share his heart. And like we have heard from Bethany, from Allison, from Rick, from others over the past couple of weeks, that worship is in spirit, that worship is in truth. It encompasses all of our emotions, the joy and the sorrow. And that worship is with a heart posture towards God and towards worshiping God. We see Jesus embodying what he said in Matthew 6:6. He goes away, he shuts the door, he goes in secret and he prays and he worships to God. In verse 9, we read about the little boy who brings his loaves and his fish. We see the innocence and the earnestness in the face of the boy. We see the genuineness of his worship offering. The barley loaves are significant as well because they would have been the cheap loaves to get. It was Passover. Everyone would have had them. Barley was, I don't know if it's still was a whole lot cheaper and more available. So right from the outset, it's just reinforcing this idea that what the boy had to bring wasn't amazing. It didn't look super nice. He could have been forgiven for thinking it was of little value. I'm pretty sure the people around would have thought something along the same lines. But the important thing is that regardless of how much he thought it was worth, he gave it. He gave that worship offering. So if we can jump back into the little scene that I set out before, we're around at my house, our family's coming around, and so we've got to have a discussion about what we're going to make and what we're going to do. Almost invariably, it results in us not having quite prepared everything that could be prepared. And so a situation could arise, and often does, where someone will say, oh, do you have this thing? Or, oh, do you have that thing? And we're not going to go, oh, no, well, we didn't think that was high enough quality for you, so you're not allowed to have it. Or we didn't put enough preparation into that for you, so you're not allowed to have it. No, we prepare the little side dishes and the condiments, and we give it to them enthusiastically, and we know that these little side dishes, even though they probably didn't take as much effort as the main thing, they probably are a way for us to show that we love our family, that we love those people who we're giving to. In the same way, I want to challenge you that maybe it's when you're headed to work, maybe your boss has called you out in public, maybe you're just not looking forward to the long day. You could probably be forgiven for thinking, a bit like the boy, you could be forgiven for thinking that your worship offering at that time is not going to be worth all that much. Now, let me tell you, you could be forgiven for thinking that it's not true. Your worship offering is always a blessing to God. And so I'm not saying you have to do like, I don't know, like super polished songs, or you have to put heaps of preparation into it. You might just like lament to God about how sucky it is to be at work at the moment. Or you might talk to him about what it's going to be like for you and what it has been like for you. God loves the little side dishes of our worship. He loves the things that maybe we don't put so much preparation into, but we still give him. In this story, I'm sure that there were other people in this massive crowd who had equal or similarly insignificant offerings like this little boy. But the key thing is that they didn't bring the offerings. The little boy knew, or he at least had faith, that that little offering that he could bring would bless people and would bless God. This tiny little offering was the catalyst for worship that sustained them. God can take any worship offering that we give and make miraculous abundance come out of it, whether it's feeding 5,000 or thousands and thousands of people, whether it's changing our perspective on work, whether it's bringing us more satisfaction. In verse 12, Jesus also talks about not wasting the abundant food that he has miraculously provided. And this worship from Jesus to God, he reminds us not to be wasteful, not wasting any opportunity to lavish love and abundance. Let's get back to my little family get-together. Let's imagine that we've done all the side dishes, and then we just decide we've done the side dishes, so let's not give them the main meal. Let's not give them what we are capable of giving them. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that doesn't really seem like we're going to honor anyone. They're not going to feel loved if we don't give them the main meal. Sorry, you can't have this because it's too good for you. No, we put work in because these are the most special people that we know. We can't waste an opportunity to lavish love on them, to give them the best that we're capable of giving them. We show them love in how we prepare the main meal and how we prepare the side dishes. We show them love in the big, the grand gestures, but in the little things as well. Much the same after the meal, after we've tried to bless our guests and to show love to our guests. We don't just throw all the leftovers away and let them rot. No, we pick them up. We in doing that, show the respect that we have for the people that we made that food for and the people that might eat that food in the future. In the same way, in the passage, they could waste all the food. They could waste all of these opportunities to thank God for his abundant provision in their life that Jesus has provided them. But Jesus invites them and in turn invites us to not waste an opportunity to worship. In our lives, when we hear a beautiful song that sums up our heart towards God, do we choose not to sing because it's too high quality? Or when we have the chance to prepare our worship for God, do we just leave the planning, let someone else sort it out? Or do we do the preparation, do the mahi, so that we can bless God the best way that we know how? We engage, we prepare, we get ourselves and our hearts ready for worship. A key thing there as well is when Jesus abundantly provides all this food, he takes the food, he gives thanks for it, and he prays to God. That's another moment in the story where he again chooses worship. And again, at the end of the passage, we see Jesus slip away. After he's done all of the miraculous things, after he's seen the signs and he's seen the wonders from God, he chooses to share his heart more with God. Maybe he was going to debrief God about all the cool things that had happened that day. Maybe he just wanted to thank God again for his part in all of it. Maybe he took an instrument with him and he wrote songs and sang songs in worship to God. We don't know exactly what he did, but we do know he removed himself to be alone with God. I think that's really exciting. And if we do our final little check-in with my family lunch, we choose to invite all of our family, not just some of them. We choose to show love to as many people in as many different ways as we can, just like our worship shows God worship in as many ways as we can. Yes, it may mean that we have to do a little bit more small talk. It might mean that we have to prepare a few more meals. But at the end of the day, we get to lavish love on the people that we love the most. So I want to challenge you guys that next time you're headed along to a worship gathering, or maybe even as you leave church today, that you would share your heart with God, that you would worship Him, and the seemingly mundane activities of life. As most of you know, I, as part of a team, help lead the youth ministry at this church. And this week we talked about the same heart of worship. And we were talking, the question that we asked, which has only just come to mind, so sorry I haven't put it up on a slide, is how do we get to worship God? And we talked at quite a bit of length about it's not how much do we have to worship God, or what are all the times that God mandates that we worship Him, but what are the times in our lives that maybe we've never thought of before that we get to worship God? I think that's a really cool question for me, like even thinking about like, walking to work in the morning. Like I get to worship God in that place, and it's such a fragrant offering to God. I'm not here just like how do we get to worship God. I'm not here to tell you how you have to worship God, but what I'm here to do for all of us, myself included, is to remind us that there are times, and way more times than we realize sometimes, that we get to worship God. God wants our worship. He loves our worship. He finds all of our worship precious. And so as we wrap up today, there's this question about how do we get to worship God? How do we get to worship God when maybe it doesn't feel super precious or super high value? How do we get to worship God in new and more extravagant ways? And then pretty much coming back to how do we get to worship God is what are the different places in our lives that we can intentionally share our heart with God, and how can we do that as often as possible?